All right, so here at Fit to Fight, the belief consistently across the board is that there are certain positions that are in ground grappling. First of all, we have to think contextually, what are the different modalities of grappling scenarios? There's like gi grappling, no gi grappling with rule sets. There's MMA where it's a looser rule set, but there's still a little bit more rules. And then there's a virtually no rules or very limited rules in a self-defense or a situation or in a street fight. So thinking about those from like the most restrictive to the least restrictive, how does that change the positional hierarchy? How does that change the effectiveness of certain positions? And does it change certain positions? I think that it does. I think certain positions that would be really good in a strictly grappling environment can sometimes be upended whenever you put it into like a self-defense context on a mixed surface, like a concrete surface. Other people might be around. There might be weapons involved. All the different factors. So what are those positions and which ones hold true? Because I think by exploring that, this just kind of popped in my head, but I think that by exploring that, you see which ones you can dedicate your time and to training and get more benefit out of across the board, and that's going to be the best use of your time. So certain positions that are good, we think about first starting with 4 basic positions in the ground grappling hierarchy. There's a guard, side control, mount, back, and then there's lots of different deviations off of that, right? So let's take the dominant positions first. And what's the most dominant position in a strictly grappling scenario? On the back. Right? That's got to be the most dominant one. So why would this be bad, possibly, in a fight? Or would it be? I've got total control over him. He's in the position where it's the hardest for him to attack me, or hardest for him to hurt me from this position. I'm in one of the best attacking positions. I've got easier access to a choke from here. I've got a lot of control positionally. Very hard for him to escape this. The difficulty then, I think, is probably in the fact that I'm so committed. Anytime I have this much surface contact, I'm this committed to him. The disengagement opportunity, which is, I think, something that's a really important consideration in a street fight. Now that disengagement opportunity is not quite as easy or quite as simple, right? So, and especially if I've taken him all the way over to the side and I'm sitting here working for a choke, I don't see anything behind me. I'm very restricted here. If I want to disengage, it's not going to be the easiest thing in the world, right? And so this could be problematic. Any thoughts on this, Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, just other things to consider when you're in this spot is I technically, if I'm carrying anything center line, if I have something access, if you're unable to maybe see that and maybe don't feel it, like maybe I have access to it. Now, is that a little bit outside of the spectrum and but it's definitely a potential possibility. You're not stopping me from getting to my waistline necessarily. And even if you start like hooking and doing stuff, like I can still get to my pocket.
Yeah.
And now if I've got a knife or some other things, like it's becomes essentially a Western shootout. Can you choke me before I stab you type deal? So yeah, there's elements of that in there.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, and so maybe a better back position would be completely prone. If I can get you completely prone down like this is maybe a little better position for the back, right? I don't have to have my hooks in necessarily. I've got good solid control. I can still access the choke from here. And the disengagement is a little bit easier for me to get up and out if I need to do that, right? Yeah. What are some other positions that we think about? Scott, you got any ideas on this, man?
What we were saying with Ryan was a position where you could disengage. Instead of, we were talking about Neon, but if I were in mount and people get what I call submission blindness sometimes, like,
yeah,
you know, and you're so into this, and if it's a fight and I start losing my position, give me a little bridge. I forget everything and I'm going to come back. And even if I need to disengage, I can come back to here now.
Yeah.
But I don't want to, even if I feel like I'm winning the fight at this moment, let him turn me over.
Yeah.
I would stop the strikes. Even if I had a high mount, I would stop the strikes before I roll. You see it all the time in jiu-jitsu, right? Guys start to do this, bridge me, and we end up here. Right.
Mm-hmm. And that's on a related topic to that too. A lot of times whenever we go through and practice a sequence, so sometimes we'll do like a headlock escape, right? So if you've got like a top side headlock and I do something where, you know, I do some kind of just sit up and I get on top of you here like this and I step over and I free myself out of the headlock. If you get in the habit and it becomes so habitual that you practice, headlock escape, armbar. right? And I don't think that is the great use of the situation here, because I'm already technical mounted, I'm close to his back, and I'm gonna jump completely off of that to go for an arm bar, where if I miss this, he's coming on top of me, and then I'm gonna be in some trouble. So I think that's where we can build some training scars sometimes and some bad habits whenever we see, oh, well, there's an arm, I'm just gonna jump on that arm. In a grappling environment, it might not have quite as many severe consequences, but definitely in a self-defense situation that could. I think that a better response might be if I freed myself from this headlock here, especially because he was already trying to roll me this way. If I free myself here, going to his back here, trying to gift wrap him here like this, get him prone on his belly down or whatever. So yeah, that kind of is in the same kind of vein where people get a little bit too perfunctory in the different sequence of movements, right?
And I think too, like what you just showed, going to escaping the headlock and then going to the armbar where you're falling back on your back, ignores the fact that this dude has already put you on the ground and got you in the headlock.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like you went from negative because that dude put you there, and now you're going to escape that position, get a dominant position, and then take the risk of falling back. Like, I get it, I understand why it happens in jiu-jitsu and in sport, whatever, but if, like you said, if that's always the response, you know, we're ignoring what happened before.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And what it limits is if you step over for that armbar, now you're limited to how you can hurt him. That's it. You have to break his arm maybe to finish it. Where if you stayed on top, you didn't have to go that far with it.
And there's no guarantee that breaking his arm isn't in the fight either. Like, dudes can fight with a broken arm. You can fight as long as you're conscious. And yeah, I think that's the thing. People do neglect that a lot of the time, to your point, like that you're starting from a negative position, you're starting from an inferior position. So that means you did something so bad, or they did something so good that they established this advantageous position on you. So for you to be able to escape directly to an advantageous position, it's not impossible, but the likelihood of it starts to diminish, like whenever you start to put that into that context, I think, right?
I'd almost say, is it like as we start talking, because we're talking about different positions that would make sense, or I guess ranking the best positions for self-defense. Is it safe to say, from an overall contextual standpoint, it's figuring out the position that finds the balance between the necessary amount of mobility and the necessary amount of control? Mm-hmm. I think that's essentially I mean, I don't know if you want to call that like the dichotomy on either side of it, because some positions I might have, like we would say back position, it's like, okay, sure, you have a ton of control, but you have no mobility to move or to be fluid in a situation. Yeah. Knee on belly, even though, or not even knee on belly, like standing outside of the feet in guard, I have a ton of mobility. They haven't linked to me yet, but I also have almost zero control at that perspective. So it's like, under the circumstances of whatever's going on as you're playing with it, how much control do I need? How much is necessary? And how much mobility should I still have? And that's kind of the balance. And I think with knee on belly,
mobility, visibility kind of goes into that too.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. Yeah.
So I do think, I think you were going to say, I think knee on belly lends itself to, because you can modify knee on belly to have more or less control. Yeah. More shin on the belt. Yeah. For example, if I wanted to kind of staple the hips and have a little bit more control, maybe force them to go prone, and then I can decide from there, am I going to take that more dominant back position where now maybe I'm giving up a little bit of mobility, but I still have a lot more control, but I'm not limited all of a sudden to like you were with I'm on their back and got my hooks in. Yeah. I don't see a lot of what's happening in the room. I don't see what's happening in front maybe, because especially if I'm fighting for, it's one thing if I've already got the choke. Yeah. Their hands are going to go to that problem, likely. Yeah. But if I'm fighting for the choke and he's fighting with one hand and he's reaching for my waistband and I don't see that and I'm so fixated on that thing, and then next thing I know, I'm getting stabbed or whatever.
What's interesting dynamic is if you stay with that, like, okay, so mobility, visibility, and then control on the outside of it. For the most part, we want to stay somewhere in the middle where we got a little bit of both, pretty good, solid accomplishment on both. And then those spaces then allow you to go one way. So if I know I can set a choke in because this dude's just, why not? And I do need to set it, which can happen. And a lot of people forget that. Like, I might not be able to leave. I'm on a subway. Right. It's like, okay, maybe the best thing is to choke this guy out. Yep. And if that means that I know I'm going to hit it, but I have to go to a little more control and lose a little bit of mobility. Yep. But I know And you know that you figure that out by grappling,
Right.
spending time, fighting.
100%.
You just know. It's like, okay, cool, I can go more control and give up that mobility, or vice versa. Running, well, you have to have enough control to get yourself in a position to have the most mobility, and then I guess you can branch off from either side of that. So it's an interesting dynamic.
I can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's every position can happen and work. So have a knowledge of all the positions. It's just where does your predilection go to, like if for focusing on positions, if you have your choice about it.
Mm-hmm.
So then that's why I think it's helpful to have kind of that scale or that gradient to look at. It's like this would be on the higher end of a functional position because it allows you a lot of control, a lot of mobility, a lot of disengagement opportunity, a lot of transitional ability, whatever, a lot of surveillance like ability. Versus this one over here is extremely limited, but there's never going to be quite a 0 and never going to be quite 100.
Yeah.
You know? And then a lot of that too, you have to factor in your proficiency with the position. You know, this can be the greatest position in the world. If you're unfamiliar with it, it's not a good position.
Yeah. So what are some really good grappling specific positions that maybe aren't so great for self-defense?
Deep half guard. Deep half. Yeah, Scott brought it up, but is on the tip of my tongue though. I love deep half. I feel like in deep half, so just for visual reference here, deep half looks typically something like this. So I'm directly underneath his foundation. I've got a lot of potential for uprooting. I can take his back off of this. I can apply submissions from here, like especially for legs. I can sweep him this way or that way. And he's kind of like a boat on the ocean if I'm playing this position right and aggressively. So he's got limited opportunity to really attack me if there's no strikes involved. However, if there's strikes involved, then I'm kind of in a bad spot right here. So now that doesn't make this a completely useless position, because you see this in MMA happen quite a bit. It's just that it gets run through kind of quick. It's kind of like the equivalent, not completely, but kind of the equivalent to seeing Wing Chun style trapping in MMA. Yeah, it happens, but it's like this quick, and it's this little snapshot of what happens, and it's usually told with Tony Ferguson.
Possible
but like,
versus plausible.
Yes, exactly, right? So that position right there, probably pretty problematic, especially in a no rules situation, essentially. Even in MMA, it becomes somewhat problematic, but the more restrictive the rules, strictly in a grappling environment, it's a strong position.
And you've seen in MMA, they run through it really quickly. It happens.
Yeah.
They use it as a transition to get out, stand back up,
Yeah.
or go to the back or whatever.
Fabricio Verdun was
Yeah.
great at deep half in MMA.
Yeah.
Yeah. What other positions? A lot of different open guard variations are problematic. De La Hiva, reverse De La Hiva, like you get into some of those kind of things. Again, I think one of the most underrated moments in the Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor one fight was Conor McGregor's X-guard sweep on Nate Diaz. So if you can go back and find that little timestamp somewhere, like that was really pretty. And so he used X-guard effectively. And like you were talking about that before we turned the camera on, about X-guard in a street fight. Yeah, I mean, you essentially have a scissor lift scaffolding underneath the guy.
Yeah.
So deep half guard that we were just talking about, the expanded version of it is X guard. So there's a direct correlation, in my opinion, between X guard and deep half guard. It's just that you're not quite sitting on me as much in X.